Please could we get a very warm round of applause for John Ferris. John, again, thank you for your time. I know you're a busy man. It's great to have you here. You've been a central figure in Belfast kind of startup ecosystem for a long time now. You've really supported new ventures and startups, myself included. I can see Keelan in the front row as well. There's a lot of people that have came through the Northern Ireland business scene that have been touched some way, shape or form by you, your input and your help. But what drives your passion for that? What drives your passion for startups and for helping people at those early tough stages?
Yeah, and I think they've probably all heard a lot of swearing from me, so you can probably expect that this morning, just to start. I think if I take a wee step back here and to talk about my background, I think that'll probably answer that question in a roundabout way, because I was a software engineer in the late 90s and went through university and did all of that stuff and ended up in America trying to put healthcare stock management systems on the internet when most people hadn't really heard of the internet. And I'd spent 10 years from being a kid really nerdily being on a Commodore 64. That was my fun place, programming. And so I'd spent 10 years really building a career to say I'm going to be a technology person and that's what I'm going to do. And I came home from Pittsburgh and went, Jesus, programming's boring as shit. It's not for me. What am I going to do? And I'd spent 10 years kind of wanting to do that. And so I was a little bit lost, and I'll be honest, I'd lied in my CV and said I had an RSA in desktop publishing, and some guy called Martin O'Willier phoned me and said I need someone to do 2 days graphic design. I was like, oh yeah, I can do that. I've got an RSA, of course I can do that. And so I was meant to be there for 2 days, and it was the week that the North Belfast News started. And so I was there an hour, and Martin went, here, go over to North Belfast and do some graphic design over there. And I was there for probably 15 minutes when the guy who was the editor at the time said, here's Nelson McCausland's number, phone him and get a story for me. I was like, oh, I just about got a C in GCSE English, that's not my thing. 15 years later, I was still in that company, and I think I stayed there because, I mean, Martin won't mind me saying this, he doesn't like paying people a lot of money. I mean, I had job interviews and offers at the time in Dublin with Microsoft and companies like that. And I could have probably made at least twice as much money in a job somewhere else doing technology. But I found very quickly the ability to help people who didn't have a voice was something that really drove me. And it kind of took me a long time to realise why I enjoyed working in newspapers so much. And I think for me it was that piece of being able to get a family, for example, that had asbestos or had mould in their ceiling and had young kids and weren't getting anywhere. Being able to actually make a difference and do something for people was the thing that actually drove me in newspapers, because you were doing that kind of reporting and challenging large organisations to be better and to do better. And I think, like, in hindsight, that's what drove me to stay in journalism for so long, because I was kind of invested and I felt like I could make an impact. And I think that thing has driven me through my career, really, is finding groups of people that I feel like I can impact. And that's the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning. It's not the money, it's the drive to help people. And I think, you know, looking back at my career, it's always nice in hindsight to look back and do that. But I think everything I've done has been involved in that, like how can I impact as many people as possible in the way that I can make a difference. And that's using my skills. And I think that was the piece that really has always resonated with me. And I think as much as I spent 15 years working in a newspaper group, the second half of that for me was full of mini startups, and I kind of had the privilege of having someone else's money to try lots of things. I launched a dating website 18 years ago, I think it was, 19 years ago. Anyone on BelfastFriends.com back in the day? Had to close that down because unfortunately the people who were coming on to it were very old, and we were making a lot of money from them phoning and talking to people for a long time, so it felt a bit wrong, it really did. You know, so we tried to launch this group alternative at one point. You know, and so looking back at my career, I had the privilege of spending 15 years in an organisation where Martin kind of gave me the reins to go and do my own thing and to try things and to do little mini startups. And like we launched lots of newspapers in that time and lots of different digital things. And I think I came in, and it was interesting listening to Neil earlier about that kind of technological change. If I look back when I joined the newspaper, that was a real inflection point in media in terms of both the way media was done was the old way, was like actually physically, manually doing all of this stuff. And when I joined, there was people who were still kind of fighting against that, instead of going, how do I know how to do this new way of doing things? And I think as Neil said, we always have that with technology. There's always something new that comes that will get rid of jobs, but it's like, how can we make sure that those jobs are replaced with other jobs? And I think the media world really helped me to, I guess, shape what I do with startups today, because like I've ran my own startup for 3 years, which I completely messed up, and kind of like I think a lot of the books that people write about how my amazing journey in the startup world, for me, I feel like I could just do the anti-book, which is every single thing that people say, don't do this, oh geez, I did that actually. and I think for me that journey of actually, I would say in reality in the newspaper world, I probably was involved in maybe 20 or 25 different startups within that organisation that was really wildly different and completely across the board. So I think that really gave me that grounding, as well as then running my own startup for 3 years and actually really understanding the realities of that. And I think when you're working with startups, there's nothing that you can. There's a lot of information out there. You can read books and go, that's how this stuff works. But if you've not been in a situation where you have been, like I always tell a story that my wife had texted me one day when I was running the startup, and I had 2 young kids at that point, saying, will you bring milk home tonight? And when I got home, I pretended I'd forgot to bring it home. The reality was I didn't have enough money in my bank account to buy 2 litres of milk. And so, but I also didn't want her to think like this is on a knife edge at every minute. So I kind of just went, oh, I forgot, sorry, I'll get it tomorrow. And that driver for me in business at that point was, where's the money coming from in the next 2 days so that I can pay my rent, pay my mortgage this month and feed my kids and all of those things. And I think having been through that and understanding what that's like for a founder is something you can't teach someone. Like you can say, I understand what's that like, what that's like, but as someone who works for a bank now, like I get paid comfortably every month on the same date, and I understand that's coming in. So it's easy to kind of look at that as a founder and go, do you really understand this? But like I've been there and had that stuff where, like I was like yourself here, and I was born in West Belfast, lived in the Falls Road for a long time, and like as a 7-year-old, I still remember finding a rubber bullet in my front garden. Call it a garden, it was the size of this table, but I think like those kind of things, sort of, you kind of look back at that and think that felt like normality to us back then. And I think for me, being involved in startup world right now it's been really exciting, because there isn't, in the last 10 years, the kind of nonsense that happens in this country has never entered into the fray within entrepreneurialism. And I like that you've got rooms full of people constantly who aren't there going like talking about this or that. They're talking about how do they make this business work, and it's exciting and it's interesting. And as I said to you at the start, Kieran, the questions you've given me were not getting through them all because I talked too much.
You couldn't have answered that better, to be fair. Again, like Neil, finding your purpose in your past and tying that into your drive and passion in the present moment. The big thing that stood out for me was giving people their voice, people that maybe didn't know how to speak out, or they hadn't found their voice yet. Neil also spoke about kind of AI and that evolving tech world. Who are the people in the tech up and the startup world at the minute that you are trying to help find that voice and have conversations that are maybe people, again, out of fear, lack of knowledge, a bit like AI, that they're maybe avoiding?
Well, I think for anyone in the room who's an entrepreneur or knows entrepreneurs are just really curious people, and that's what drives them to be able to do something different and think about that, because it's having that curiosity which really drives you. And there's some great people in the room sitting here tonight, this morning. Simon, give everybody a wave. Simon's raising money at the minute. Anybody wants to invest in a private startup in the wedding industry, go talk to Simon later on. But like there are so many great people in the startup world, and I think what is great about founders is it is mostly I've got a problem, how do I overcome it? And it's not normally the simple and logical path to do that, because if it was simple and logical, everybody would be doing it, and there wouldn't be anything different. So I think for me, the AI side of things is challenging, both in the startup world, but also I think through the entrepreneurial history, when there is a challenge, that's where opportunity is. And I think that's where great entrepreneurs kind of thrive, because where there's a problem, instead of saying, oh crap, this isn't going to work for us. It's how do I get around that, or how do I make something from that? And I think that's where entrepreneurs really thrive. So I'm both equally worried and frightened about AI, like everyone is, but also 50% really excited about what's going to come from that and what that will enable for companies and people moving forward. Like it's been 20 years since I programmed, but like I used ChatGPT this week for, I'll cross over your photography stuff, Neil. I found a couple of old CDs in my garage of pictures that I'd taken in I think the late 90s, early 2000s. They were very scratched, tried to get, and I knew it was pictures I really wanted to get. And every time I tried to copy them off onto my computer, it just kept crashing. And I kind of went on to ChatGPT and said, can you write me a script that will individually go and copy those over, try and keep doing it until, and it connected in and copied and pasted the code in itself, and basically all I had to do was type run this thing. I was like, I hope it's not blowing up my computer, but like, obviously not. But 3 minutes later I had like 450 pictures that I hadn't had, and I think the options before would have been, I could probably bring that to someone and spend £100 for them to try and get that off, and then it turns out it's pictures of dogs or something, or something that's not really personal to me. But actually I think today being able to do things like that is really exciting from a personal perspective, and not having to have those skills. You don't need to go and spend 50 quid or 100 quid to buy a product to do that. You can say, here's my problem, it's a really small niche problem, but fix it for me. So I think I'm really excited about AI and how that sort of evolves the entrepreneurial world, and I think the reality is it will evolve all of our lives, but I think we just have to roll with that and move with it.
Neil said something that we need to find more people that buck the trend, because they're the entrepreneurs, they're the innovators. Gonna just, I suppose, bridge that into something you're passionate about, which is neurodiversity. And often the case is the people that buck the trends and that, change the system and rise above and transcend the norm usually are neurodiverse and perhaps don't have a voice in the startup space. And I know that's something you're really championing at the minute.
Yeah, I think so. If I take a step back, I'm 48 years old now. Last year I got diagnosed with autism and ADHD, which then for the past year I've been writing about that online because I've kind of missed writing, number one. And number two, as a 47-year-old at the time who got a diagnosis, there was a lot of books about, and they were like clickbaity books about 10 things that an autistic person does, or 10 things not to say to someone with ADHD. There was nothing to say you've woken up as 47 years old. How do you go through that journey of understanding what this has meant for me in the past decades? How does that reflect on things that happen in my life? All of those things. There's nothing that really talks to you about what that's like to go through that journey of waking up and going. Because really, I brought my daughter in for a diagnosis, and my wife kept glancing over at all the questions, going, like, what are you looking at me? So we're here for her. What's happening here? And like a lot of that was, so I kind of wasn't out looking for that. But I think honestly, as an adult, it's been probably the toughest year of self-reflection and therapy and all of those things to start to understand what has that meant for my life so far, and what does that mean for me as a person today. And that's not that's like simple changes to things that, like, I am a pretty sarcastic person a lot of the time, but also my wife would say that I am very, very sarcastic, and actually being able to say to her last year, look, here's a couple of examples where you think I'm being sarcastic, and I'm not. I'm actually just answering your question with logic. And so the simplest form of that is, we've lived in the same house since it was built 20 years ago. Every single second Tuesday, the bins go out today. And my answer had always been, okay, thanks, and I would sit down. And so in her head, that is, put the bins out, because they get picked up in the morning. In my head, I'm like, what the fuck are you telling me something I have known for 20 years for? Like, why are you telling me this? And this happened every 2 weeks for decades. And in my head, I'm going, you're telling me something I know, thank you. And so, but for me, being able to say to her, when the bins need to go out, can you say, will you put the bins out right now? Okay. And so overnight, that kind of conflict where we were bickering about stuff, where she was kind of getting angry at me because I'm I'm sitting down and watching TV when she's looking at me to do something, and she thinks I'm being ignorant or rude, and I'm going, like, in my head, I know it's happening every 2 weeks, but in my head, you're just telling me something logical. Like, so, okay, thank you. So I think that piece from a personal perspective has been a year of like understanding myself a bit better. What does that mean? And I think through that journey, I think looking back over the last 10 years of working with entrepreneurs, I think there's definitely this this definite vibe of, because a lot of people who either are diagnosed or undiagnosed will kind of felt like they didn't fit in, or without really knowing why that was or what was going on. And I think like entrepreneurialism gives you that ability, I guess, to do your own thing and be your own person within that. So I think there's a lot of people who are entrepreneurs who will probably undiagnosed or diagnosed are the ones who think differently and think about things in a different way. Like, I don't think I should ever create some sort of app that tells you to put your bins out at any stage, but you know, I think that thought process and how people think and act and do things differently is really key to how we drive both a business sense and an entrepreneurial lens, because if everyone is the same, like nothing really changes or nothing happens. And you know, we had this conversation last week or the week before, Kieran, about this panel, and my first question was, Kieran's 3 middle-aged fucking white guys. Like, what are we doing? Like, you know, we're another manel that I would normally say no to. But for me, I've started to realise in the past year, well, actually, when I do sit there in front of an audience, I am representing a group of people, whereas 18 months ago, I went, I'm another middle-aged white guy with privilege. So I have nothing to add to a panel in terms of, like, there's countless, I mean, I'm glad you wore a jumper, Neil, because we literally even wore the same shirt. Like, I think if you just put a box over him, like, it's another middle-aged white guy talking about some stuff. But I think for me, diversity is a real key, and the piece that Neil's talking about, how do we drive that in Northern Ireland as we go forward, that comes from diversity, and that comes from a different, I sat in the panel last year with Innovate UK had put on, and the guy who'd asked me to sit on it, I'd said to him, like, you don't want me in this panel. And he went, no, you're exactly who we want now. Look, by the time this panel's over, you're just going to go, what the hell did I put him on there? And about halfway through, we were sitting in the back, and about halfway through the talk, I kind of gave him a wave and went, remember I told you didn't want me up here? Because there was people on stage, like, talking absolute nonsense. You know, if we bring this to an entrepreneurial lens, like we've 2 companies that have raised about 500k each in the past month or two, and with us in the hub at the minute. If you look at the investment side of things for startups, like we're close to 2% of funding goes to female founders, you know, and that's dramatically went up from like 1%. You know, so and it always confused me when I started in running the accelerator, was if I looked at our top 10 companies we had in the room, probably 7 of those were female founders, and none of them could raise investment. And the 3 people who had something okay who were men were finding it pretty easy. And I think for me, that was just really confusing, as we've got these great companies that are doing amazing things that need funding to move forward. Why the hell are they not getting that? And I think that's the piece that we have huge opportunity in Northern Ireland to really push forward and ensure that everyone has that voice in entrepreneurship. And I remember speaking to some senior people in government a few years ago and talking about ethnic minority founders and why we weren't doing more to support that. And I kept getting the same response, was, oh, if you look at the census data, what's the point? And that to me felt like, what is wrong with you? Because we're trying to give people the opportunity to build businesses. And I heard that for years and years, and one of the things we had done as a bank a few years ago was work with a university in England to look at what were the challenges around entrepreneurship for black founders, for example. And one of the biggest challenges were us as a bank, for example. Like, I mean, we created a 40-page report that basically you could have summed it up in a sentence, which is, we're the problem. And so if we're the problem, we need to go out and do something to fix that. And it's not on everyone else, it's on us. And so I spent about 3 or 4 years going out in the communities, having conversations to go, how do we make this a more welcoming place for a founder to come to? And 19% of our founders that are on our program right now are ethnic minority founders. And a lot of people in the startup ecosystem are like, whoa, how's that happening? It's like, there's a huge number of people out there who want help and who need it. But if they go to a room and it's full of people who don't look like them and don't have the experience they have, like, are they coming to that? And so it's intended upon us all to go out and go, how do we make this more inclusive across the board, whether that's neurodiversity or whether it's for women or whether it's for ethnic minority founders or disabled founders or whatever that is. And I think that's the biggest opportunity we have. We have this untapped group of people who actually don't see places that are welcoming for them. And I think as we start to change things here, I think that for me is the real potential that we could make such an impact. And I think that comes with hard work, because there isn't a magic button to press and go, right, we're going to change this. You know, to go from 2% of funding in women to 50% of funding or 60% of funding, like that ain't happening in the next, like possibly in my lifetime. But that doesn't mean we can't continually push and go, what are we doing this week, this day, this hour to change that? And I think that's the thing that, again, back to that piece of, you know, being in the early days in journalism, like that driver to go, this is wrong, like that's the fact. And the only people who don't think that's wrong is the people who are making the money and doing all of those things and causing those issues. And so for me, it's how do we change that? And changing it is continually calling it out and saying, how are we being better at that? And that's not to shame anyone or anything like that. It's to say, we just need to be better. We just need to make sure that when we run events, they're inclusive. We need to make sure that when we run programs, they're designed for the people who are on them. Like one of the things I'm looking at the minute is from a neurodiversity standpoint, like there are different things. Like I look back and 10 years ago, I remember hosting an event and someone was sitting at the front on their laptop typing away while someone was speaking, and I was told, go over and tell them to close the laptop. And I look back at that and go, I know that person quite well now, and actually how they concentrate is having to do a couple of things at the same time. So that is them actually really paying attention to you. That's not them not paying attention to you and just being bored of you and working. That's how they can really focus on what you're doing. And so there's lots of little things that we need to start looking at and how we run programs that are inclusive. And you know, we've got some people who the lighting that we have in our accelerator, for example, is just not feasible for them to come in the room. And so like, how do we change that? What do we do about that? And a lot of this is like stuff like that is challenging, because then you're going, we need to spend money on something, but we need to keep shouting it out and we need to keep changing it. And whether that all of those things can only change when we all start to ask those questions and do those things to make an impact. We shouldn't have to have VC funds that are focused on women, because we should have VC funds that are focused on who's the great companies that we're investing in. You know, I was with Awaken Hub this week, and we've been a supporter of theirs from they launched about 4 years ago. And you know, if you look at what they're doing, for anyone who doesn't know, it was the first All-Ireland Accelerator Programme for women, and then about 2 years ago they launched Awaken Angels, which is to drive more investment in female founders, but also to get more women to invest in companies. And when I was with them on Wednesday night, they kind of talked about, I remember that vision of how do we get more women to invest in women for a start, and democratise investment as a way that you can build wealth for yourself. And they've got, you know, we sat in a panel about 2 years ago where my daughter came in because she was really interested in this, and Mary McKenna had sat on stage and said there's currently 7 active female angel investors in Northern Ireland. You're like, oh crap, that's not good. On Wednesday night, they were telling me that they're currently, in the past year, they've had 75 new female angel investors on the island of Ireland. Like, that is change. Is it at 500 or 1,000? No. But it's 75 more than we had two years ago. And so I think it's incumbent on us all, whether that's the work Neil's doing with schools and all of those things, or the work we're doing with entrepreneurs, is to have those things in mind when we're doing them, to make sure that we can affect change, because there's a huge opportunity in that. And I think that's the piece that we really need to focus on, because that will help drive the economy and drive everything else.
Yeah. John, thank you. I mean, I love that piece around everyone having their role to play in this conversation. I'm going to talk about your personal vision in terms of what that may look like, but I'm bringing you back to the bin story, because there's a story about me and you, the CRM system. Do you remember? I didn't know what a CRM system was last year and went to John. I was like, John, I think I need this thing because my CRM system's currently a jotter and there's just things wrote everywhere. But I don't know what to do because he's telling me this one and she's telling me that one, and John was at his laptop and he just looked up at me and said, Kieran, why don't you just pick one and get on with it? And that was him just being logical. Now, thankfully, I knew John and I just laughed and went, he's actually quite right, instead of overthinking this, and just pick one and get on with it. I love that about you. It's just no fluff. Just here's what you need to do as a founder. Get on with it, and I'm here to support you if needs be. Looking ahead, obviously a leader in the startup world. Embracing innovation, embracing change, happy to have the uncomfortable conversations. What do you foresee the next 5 years looking like in terms of that conversation? What obstacles you might come across, but also what could come of it for when we're talking of schools, when we're talking of ethnic minorities, female founders, the whole greater picture?
Well, I think first of all, like our accelerator turns 10 in February, so that's kind of an exciting moment for me, because it's but also as you would expect from a bank, someone internally is going, right, well, let's do this event to say how awesome we are. I'm like, yeah, that's great. It's not going to happen. Like my focus on that is that's a great inflection point for me to say, right, what's happening in the next 10 years, or not what have we done in the past 10 years, because the self-aggrandizing kind of stuff that just doesn't work for me. And also, we're doing this, we were a social enterprise that I joined originally. I did not join a bank. The bank bought us 7 years ago. And so again, I wouldn't have applied for a job in a bank. Actually, when the bank bought us, I was voted most likely to be sacked within 2 months, which, still here. I'm actually on the board now, which is really frightening. But, I think for me, the focus is what are we doing in the next 10 years? And I think when I was a founder, I was on the Propel program with Invest and I back 10 years ago, I think, or 11 years ago now. I think when I look back to that, there was absolutely no collaboration in the startup ecosystem here. There was nothing. And as a founder, it kind of felt like, right, if you're part of this thing, you can't really be involved in anything else. And I think for me, that change in the past 10 years has been amazing. And I think there's so much more collaboration, because that is, the reality is we ain't doing this on our own. There isn't one organisation that's going to be the thing that makes this better, and that's it. The only way this works is collaboration and making sure that we are directing people over to Ormo Basfors or Ormo Labs when I feel like I've sat in interviews with people and just went, like, this isn't right for you. There's Ian Brown's number, go and talk to him. Or here's someone else to go and speak to. And I think that collaboration piece is the thing that I'm excited to say in the next 10 years. How do we ramp that up? Like at the minute, my plan is, and I'm just manifesting this by saying it, like we've half a floor in the bank right now. My aim by our 10th anniversary is to move that to the 3rd floor on our building and have a whole floor. But that's not to say have more space for us. That's to say, how do we be more involved in the community of entrepreneurial world? So young enterprises, everyone in the room probably knows, lost half their funding a couple of years ago. Carol and her team have been in our accelerator for the past 3 years, and they've been there because that is the starting point from the entrepreneurial world. Like kids and teenagers, like I was an entrepreneur in university and didn't know it because no one talked about it back then. Like I once bought 20 cots from Boots because they were trying to get rid of them and they were on sale for like £5, and I bought 20 cots and sold them for 25 quid. I didn't know that was being an entrepreneur. But I think the reality is we need to look forward and go, how do we connect that stuff? So I'm going, how do we move to a bigger space, and how do we then bring other organisations in to take away the rent cost, to take away the cost of having all of that stuff? And because a lot of the programs that are run, a huge amount of that cost is the infrastructure and all of the stuff that you need to have a space to run something. So for me, that vision for me in the next 10 years is, how do we bring more people in for the impact that has with taking that cost out for that organisation? And like when Carol from Young Enterprise came and started working out of our place, it wasn't because they lost funding, because they hadn't. But at that point, this makes sense because we are building this ecosystem and we need to have more people who are collaborative and work together and do those things. And I think for me, the next 5 years or next 10 years are exciting because there are so many more companies now than when I started in this. It was very much you're coming into our playground. Whereas I think in the next 10 years, as Neil talked about earlier, we're all trying to figure out what AI means for us right now, and no one actually has the answers. So we're all just kind of, whatever expert's telling you is an expert with an opinion right now is the reality, and we all know that. But in the next 10 years, I think the thing for me that I believe will really work is collaboration and ensuring that we aren't leaving people behind. We have a lot of stuff from a disabled founder perspective, for example. If you're applying for a program and that program isn't even asking you if you have a disability, you can be pretty sure if you're in a wheelchair, for example, you've seen this stuff all your life and you know that is not for me. Because if you're not even asking me, have anything that you need to know about, then the reality is you're probably not going to have anything in place to help us. And so there's a lot of groups out there that aren't even getting in front of us because we're putting the blockers in place. It's not them, it's us. And so I think for me, it's about the next 10 years is how do we be more collaborative? How do we make sure that everyone can do this and take away the barriers rather than continually put the barriers up? I think if anyone was at the Harkin Summit here a couple of years ago, I was really blown away by that because it was the first event I was at was about this has actually, and there was a lot of money spent on it, so but there was so much thought and effort put into who was going to be in the room. There was multiple sign language, like different sign language on stage because it was different people in the room who were different signs. Senator Harkin, he got up and opened the conversation, described what he looked like and what he was wearing, and I was like, that's a bit weird. And I was like, actually, well, if you're blind and sitting in this room, you are connecting with that person to actually say, this is who I am and this is what I'm doing right now. And I think simple things like that make a huge impact for some of the people I spoke to that day. That makes a huge difference. And I think there's no reason, like a lot of stuff can cost money, but a lot of stuff is just we're not doing it. And it's not complicated, and it's not challenging, and it's not costing anything. It's about being human and actually understanding that entrepreneurs are human like everybody else, but we're blocking loads of people from getting into that. And I think for me, the next 10 years is how do we be as collaborative as we can and make sure that those doors are open for everybody and not just a small group of middle-aged white guys.
John, I think that's again a lovely note to leave it on, just that real emphasis on collaboration and the onus being on us to remove any barriers. Ladies and gentlemen, please a very warm round of applause for John Ferris.